Naomi, thank you for joining me.
Oh, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. I feel like this has been a long time in the making.
The main thing is we're here now, so I really appreciate your time, and we've got a
Of
lot
course.
to unpack and yeah, a lot to explore. So we'll delve in. I always like to kind of get back to the beginning of people's careers and kind of understand what they wanted to do and where they've ended up and see how they kind of got there. So what were your, I guess, early career aspirations, plans, and how did your kind of career get going?
When I think about that question, then it's quite funny because it takes me back to when I was 12 years old and I was living in the UK in Nottingham at the time. And I woke up one morning and I said, Mum, we have to go down to the Navy recruitment office in town. She's like, why? I'm like, because I need to plan my career. I've always been a planner. And so at the age of 12, we got on the bus, Nottingham City bus, and we headed down into the recruitment office in the middle of Nottingham town, Nottingham City Centre. And God knows what these poor, Navy men, servicemen were thinking. But walked in and Mum said, well, this is your meeting, so off you go. And I said, well, I want to join the Navy. What do I need to know? What do I need to do? What do I need to prepare for? So they gave me all the details of what I needed to do and prepare for and all that sort of stuff. And to be honest with you, my career aspirations never changed from there. The only thing that changed was going from Navy to Army. And so it was really interesting to sort of shape what I was always planning on doing based on a dream of a 12-year-old, but nothing ever changed. It was always very steadfast. I was going to join the Army. I was going to be in there for a certain period of time. I was going to do X, Y, Z. And I was really, really focused on that as my life goal. Little did I know at the age of 12 that life sort of hits you around the head a few times and creates a few changes, which it certainly did. So I did actually join the Army, the Australian Army. I went into Duncombe, which is the Royal Military College in Australia. And unfortunately, I got injured. So that lifelong career of being in the Australian Army didn't sort of pan out the way I expected. And I needed to create a new plan. And at the time, my mum was at IBM. And she said, you know what, until you work it out, why don't you come and be a PA at IBM? There was a bit of nepotism there, but she did help me in. And I worked for the state sales manager, Greg Cassano, at the time. 6 weeks in, he sort of said, Naomi, you're not a great PA, which I wasn't, to be fair. And he said, but you might be good in sales. Would you be interested in joining IBM.com? And I just done a full event with IBM.com and from the sellers, and I was really interested. And the boss at the time was a man by the name of Richard Scott. And still to this day, probably hands down the best leader I've ever worked for. And he welcomed me with open arms. This very, very green newbie who had never sold a thing in her life that's come out of the Australian Army. Didn't know, a computer from a keyboard at that stage. And I was selling IBM hardware, software, services to South Australian small, medium businesses. That's kind of how I got into it.
Wow. How did you feel when you were told you weren't going to be a PA, but you potentially could be good at sales? Did you feel like you then made that transition well? Like, did you pick up sales quickly? Did you find that you had the skill set to adapt?
Yeah, I did actually. Look, my mum was in sales her entire life, so I feel like I've been around, what selling looks like, what creating a value prop looks like. Another story from when I was a kid, I wanted a 16th birthday party. And my mum asked me to write a business proposition, which she still has, by the way. So it was a full-on presentation around, what party I wanted, what was going to be the spend, how cleanup was going to happen, how we're going to control people coming in. So all those sorts of things. As funny and as silly as that sounded back then, it really did create not only the work ethic around how I go about running business, but it also created a way of me working through the logical steps of, what it is I wanted to achieve to be able to put it into practice. So it wasn't just the idea, it was creating the how-to as well. So I felt like that really set me up. And there's lots of different stories like that, but that really set me up for a good start in my sales career. But then I needed to understand the science behind the art, because I felt like I had the art, but I didn't have the science. So I was really fortunate because IBM, back in the days, I'm not sure now, but back in the days, they had an incredible sales program that we were all enrolled in for approximately a year. It was called Global Sales School. And not only did I learn some incredible things as part of a cohort going through that, I then became the faculty as well. So I really got to learn to teach what I'd learned. And I feel like the moment that you can teach something is the moment that you know it. So I was really fortunate to sort of have that sales upbringing initially with my mum, and then moving into IBM, which I feel at the time, again, I'm not sure now, but at the time was hands down the best sales training there was.
So you were selling hardware and software, kind of anything that came under the IBM banner?
Yeah, so as an IBM.com sales representative, you do focus on software, hardware, and services. So hardware could be computers, could be servers, the software could be something like Lotus Notes or something like that. And then services was anything around the innovation, the business tech services around it. Mm-hmm. So I got to work with GBS back in the day, as well as GTS. And I actually moved into GTS a few years later, sort of just working in that business technology service.
And you, as your career progressed, you went on to work with a number of different technologies, but you've landed on Salesforce. Your career is in the Salesforce ecosystem, the Salesforce space now. What was it about Salesforce specifically that made you want to kind of align your career to the platform?
So it was kind of a departure for me. So what had happened was I decided when I was coming through IBM, I was coming through with an incredible cohort of people. They all had, masters. They were highly educated, highly intelligent people. And I didn't have any of that. I don't have a degree. So it was, what do I do to stand out from the rest of the crowd here? Like, how do I go about doing this? And so I didn't want to go back to school. That wasn't something that I felt was, something that I wanted to do. So I did the practical version of an MBA in my mind. I went and ran my own business. I ran a business that I knew absolutely nothing about, which was marketing. So I'd never been in marketing before, but I had this idea of what I wanted to do, and I decided to go and do it. So I had seed money of about $10,000, which didn't get me far, but it did get me a ticket to the Selling from Stage circuit, which allowed me to go and build business. So basically what it is you go and sell from stage for a period of time, and you get people to sign up to your services. And it was a fast way for me to sort of create a membership program. That membership program was largely on marketing services. And so I had this rule in my head, which I only had to be one day ahead of my members. So I basically was building the program as members were signing. At that stage, this awesome thing came about. I don't know if you've heard about it, Ben, but it was called email autoresponders. Whoa! It was like amazing. And so I started to get into autoresponders initially with MailChimp, and then into ExactTarget. And the reason I got into ExactTarget at the time was because I was working for Westpac, and I was teaching their small business owners about email autoresponders, and we decided to use ExactTarget to demonstrate. So all of their work was actually done on ExactTarget back in the day. And so from there, I kind of fell in love with the product, and it became Salesforce. I think that's nearing on 20 years ago now, Ben.
Yeah, it's crazy how time flies, eh?
I know. I just felt very old when I said that.
Yeah, I this week I've been talking about like placing generations of people, and that's made me feel very old now. Generations from families placing different generations into jobs. I'm like, I've been doing this job far too long.
It's when they start calling you uncle that you've got a problem.
yeah, that's it. So you have run marketing cloud practices. You went on to run practices of big global consulting firms, and you've also obviously now you're running a business unit for Salesforce broadly. So not just marketing cloud, but cross cloud. So I guess for relatively unique position of knowing the challenges of both in terms of like the difference between selling core and working with core customers, and then working in more in that marketing space. So what are the major differences between running a marketing cloud practice whether that's standalone or part of a bigger business unit, compared to running a like sales, service, experience cloud, and what that has to offer a practice?
Look, I think it's changed quite considerably. I remember when I was running marketing cloud practices back in the day, it was almost like this marketing cloud or MarTech world was such a what's behind the iron curtain type of situation. And people just didn't understand what this MarTech terminology was all about. So it did feel like it was sort of, voodoo or black magic or something like that people didn't really understand. And so you would have to really take them through it. Whereas CRM or core was always widely well understood. Salesforce weren't the first to create a CRM. We had Siebel before that. I have to say I was a big Siebel fan. So, looking at the two differences back then, it was worlds apart. Today, it is so well entrenched and integrated that you have to be able to talk the full lifespan of the client, or the customer. So if you're talking about marketing and you can't talk about how if somebody who is complaining on social media gets routed into a service queue, and you can't have that conversation, then you can't have a CRM conversation, you can't have a marketing conversation.
Mm-hmm.
So you really need to be able to understand that full funnel. And it's interesting. I've been saying for a few years now that I don't actually believe it's a funnel anymore. It's more of a bow tie, because you come in one end, you're getting churned through the sales service, and then you're going back through loyalty, right? So it's changed demonstrably, if you like. So in terms of what it was versus what it is now, for me, it is one conversation. Back then, it was 3 or 4 conversations that you needed to have that aligned to each of the different technologies.
Mm-hmm.
The best part of it now is that with Salesforce bringing all of the clouds onto one platform, it makes that conversation easier and it makes it make more sense. Whereas before it was like a jigsaw that you're pulling all together, all the pieces. Now it's, okay, so what part of this piece of the puzzle do you need to activate?
Mm-hmm.
As opposed to, oh, hang on a second, we've got all these different elements that we need to bring together. So it's a very different proposition, and the conversations that I'm having now are vastly different. A lot of people are very well tuned into having a MarTech conversation versus a CRM conversation. There's no longer that big brick wall between the two. So for me, running a MarTech, practice externally from a core practice makes no sense, because to me, it has to be combined and conjoined.
Yeah, and I think we've seen that over the years, right? We used to see a lot of the MarTech consulting businesses didn't do core. Like, historically, you saw a lot of more agency kind of focused marketeers that were doing marketing cloud. Now they've either been acquired or they've bolted on core. I think that kind of definitely does align to what we've seen over the years.
Yeah, it is interesting. I feel that if you only sort of stop at that marketing funnel side of things, you're really leaving a lot of money on the table. And maybe I shouldn't say that, given the cover of Accenture. But you do leave a lot of money on the table, because nobody wants just that little bit. It needs to be a full transformation around how a customer interacts with a brand, or how a client interacts with a brand. And if you're not thinking about that, if you're not thinking about what the overarching macro vision is, then you're never going to get to that point, because you can't remember I talked to you about when I was 12, I created my plans and all that sort of stuff. Same thing. If you don't know what that overarching vision is, then how are you going to create those plans to get you there? Same with your tech. If you don't know what you're trying to achieve with your tech, how are you going to build it if you're just doing it in piecemeal? It makes no sense.
Yeah, 100%. You mentioned a couple of leaders you've worked for in the past that still, stand out for you as great leaders. How did you find the transition into leadership when you started managing people? And have there been things that you've taken from previous leaders to kind of shape your own leadership style?
There's certainly been a lot of things I've taken from previous leaders that I've decided not to bring into my leadership style. I will be honest about that. To me, it's an ongoing process. I filter out things that I don't like, and I filter in things that I do like. My personal belief is that you've got to be a 360-degree leader, which means you can't just be good at the tech. You can't just be good at the sales. You can't just be good at the people development. You have to be able to transition from each and every part of leadership to bring your whole self to the day, to the business. And I think one of the things that I noticed a lot of leaders struggle with is that vulnerability side. they forget that they need to be human for their people. And unfortunately, what that does is it creates a huge silo of leader versus staff, and never the two shall meet. And so one of the things that I've really taken on board, and I think Rich Scott was probably one of the ones that I took this from, Iggy Pintato, who was IBM, Simon Pollard, who's now at Salesforce. I think about Peter Ewan here at Accenture, Boo Bang from Accenture, some of the other people, Anka as well from Accenture. I take bits and pieces that I see from them. So if I look at Pete Ewan, who's my medium boss now, I take from him his ability to be his ability to cut through the crap, right? So he cuts through the crap really, really well. But then I look at Anka and how she brings a softened element to leadership, and I take that on board too. So if I think about me as a leader, I'm probably a mishmash of a whole lot of leaders, if I'm honest, with my own Naomi flair. I do have a tendency to sort of sometimes be too much of a people pleaser, and that has not held me in good stead, to be honest with you. I have been walked over a few times. So I am still a work in progress, absolutely. So I try not to be that people pleaser, but sometimes I go too far the other way now. But I'm trying to find my way back to the middle. But I'm not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, and I'll look out for those really amazing leaders and try and see what I want to take as a model. And I'm constantly, like I said, I'm agile. I'm iterating as I go in terms of what my leadership style looks like.
But you kind of need to be, right? Because there's always going to be another challenge that you've not faced before, and you kind of have to learn to go through that challenge as it comes. And your point about the Naomi flair, I think you have to put your own stamp on your own leadership style. You can't just be a mixture of everyone else, because otherwise it's not authentic, right? You're just that's really important as well. I think that authenticity in leadership is one of the key things, like being yourself, being true to yourself, and being seen as authentic.
Yeah, absolutely. It's probably one of the things I talk about the most is, bring your genuine self, be authentic, and be vulnerable. And the reason I say those things is because, I don't want my younger staff to think that, A, they can't come and have a conversation, a cry, a whinge, or anything like that with me. They absolutely can. But I also want them to learn to be better leaders than what we've had in the past. I don't want them to be, those pig-headed leaders that, it's their way or the highway. That's not what works these days. We are more collaborative in our approach. We have to meet each other halfway. It's really, really important. So unless I can model that from my team, I can't expect that from them. Mm-hmm. So I need to be the person that I want them to be when I work for them one day. That's my aim. If I can work for one of the guys that I've brought through the ranks, then I tell you what, my job here is done, and I can retire happy.
Yeah, awesome. So tell me a bit about your role now. Obviously, you were living in Australia for a number of years. You're now living in Singapore. What do you do there at Accenture, and what kind of people are you leading?
I've been in Singapore for 6 years now. I can't believe it. It feels like it was only a second ago that I moved here. I came here for 4 days, by the way, and that was 6 years ago. So I clearly love it. I now sit in Singapore, but I run the Salesforce Business Group for Southeast Asia. So that includes Singapore, Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, and sometimes the Philippines, depending. And I have teams across all the different regions. So we've got a team of about 140 now.
Yeah, wow, and that's across all of Salesforce, right?
Correct. So sales, service, commerce, marketing, Tableau, and Mule.
So a lot of our listeners will be listening from, Australia, New Zealand, the UK, the US. How do the markets there compare? So the markets you service, how do they? I guess Australia is the obvious one for you to compare it to, having worked here before. But do you find like there's different ways of working with different countries, different cultures, different expectations from services?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a very different sale here. First and foremost, the thing that I learned is you have to be here in order to sell here. And you have to make it clear that you live here. I think there's a tendency for people from other countries to come to Southeast Asia and assume that they don't know how to operate, or they assume that they're a little bit immature in their ways of thinking. This is probably the most intelligent group of people I've ever come across, if I'm honest. Honestly, the clients here, they push every button that you can find in terms of pricing, in terms of assumptions, in terms of solutioning, in terms of experience. It's fascinating, and largely because Singapore is really the mecca of finance or financial services, you do get a lot of experience, global experience that ends up here in Singapore. So when you come and work in Southeast Asia, you really have to lift your game. Now that's just Singapore. Then when you take on some of the other countries across Southeast Asia, the culture again is very different. So you have to work in a different way. You have to speak in a different way. You have to convey your thinking in a different way, and you have to solution in a different way. So in terms of, what can I liken it to? I don't think I can, if I'm honest. I can't compare it to Australia. It's vastly different. I really love the work here because it does feel like it's a little bit more global in terms of, the reach. We'll work on programs of work that is a Southeast Asia rollout that has come from Europe, for example. Or we'll be the ones that are building the template here in Southeast Asia and rolling it out elsewhere, and they would want our team to do the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a very different way of working. Sometimes it's very rapid in its approach, and then we have it on the other opposite scale, and it's very, very slow. So public sector everywhere is slow, no doubt. Public sector here, super slow. So you do have to build that patience within, and the thick skin is very much needed here in Southeast Asia. You get very good at rejection, I have to say.
Yeah. Are there, if you look at Singapore specifically, are there, you mentioned public sector, I know like there's been some big telecoms projects there, like are there industries that kind of dominate the Salesforce landscape there?
In Singapore, yeah, public sector is definitely one of the heavy hitters in terms of industry. We're starting to see a little bit more interest across FS as well as retail and consumer goods. But I would say that for Singapore in particular, it's public sector. If we look at Thailand, I'd say it's financial services. If we look at Malaysia, it's probably utilities, oil and gas, etc. Indonesia is still a really new market, and it's very, very exciting. It looks like it's going to be a telco financial services play. I'm hoping public sector goes there too. They went live with their Hyperforce only a few months ago. Agentforce is coming to Indonesia January, February. So, we've got some really exciting things to do in that market in particular. And we've just started teams. So we've got a team of 5. I know it doesn't sound big, but, it's hard to find skills. But, so, I'm really excited about Indonesia as a region.
And what about, like you mentioned, finding skills? I know, obviously, when you hire, you're looking for people to be in Singapore, as an example, when you're building out that team. Like across your remit, is it a difficult talent landscape in all of the regions?
Yeah, it is. So I have people in each of the locations. We don't centralize. So for the people here in Singapore, they largely will work on Singapore work, and Malaysia for Malaysians, Thai for Thailand, Indonesians for Indonesia. And the reason being is context. So having cultural context is super important in this area. And often what we'll see is when, different countries come together to work on a program, it works okay, but it's often a requirement that they have Thai-speaking BAs or Thai-speaking solution architects, for example, which I kind of agree with because they do understand the context and the layout of the world in their country a lot better than somebody from Singapore, for example. Mm-hmm. So I do try and sort of replicate that. But to your point, finding skills is really hard. It's hard everywhere for Salesforce skills. I've probably not seen it quite as hard as it is here. So we're looking at lots of different ways of bringing talent in, whether that's, upskilling, cross-training, bringing in experienced people, bringing in new grads. Everything and anything you can think of is what we're trying to do. In fact, we've actually got 55 open roles at the moment in the Salesforce Business Group, so in all locations. So it's a really challenging market to find skills in, but we're pushing hard.
Yeah, you have to, I guess, with the amount of demand that's growing. So that's awesome to know. So yeah, obviously anyone that's interested in careers in Singapore, They know where to go.
Singapore, Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia.
Yes. Sorry, yeah, I should have. So you mentioned being a vulnerable leader, and yeah, one of the things that really stood out to we've been connected on LinkedIn for a while, but one of the things that really stood out to me was your vulnerability and you sharing your own story. Like for a number of months now, going back well over a year. But your most recent one was your or one of the most recent was talking about the journey you've been on with your cochlear implant and the 12-month milestone you've just hit. So tell me a bit about that journey and also the decision to be vulnerable and the kind of thinking behind that, because it's admirable and I'm very, very glad you did, but it's not something everyone would be comfortable with, especially at kind of your level and your what you do day to day and things like that. So yeah, can you tell me a bit about that journey?
Yeah, sure. So let me take you back a little bit first. So we're not really sure when I started losing my hearing. I do know that I failed 2 hearing tests when I was joining the army. Don't tell them that. But I claimed a cold and did it again and again until I passed. So we think it's been around for a lot longer than anticipated. But one of the things that I do is I lip read and I context jump. So I understand certain words and then I just put all the pieces of the puzzle together and I assume I know what I'm talking about. The challenge with that is that when you start missing some of those words to help you context jump, you start to make guesses. And those guesses are no longer educated. And so when I was about 35, it started to get really bad. So I stopped answering phone calls. I stopped being overly social. I kept complaining that everybody mumbled and the TV was broken, all those sorts of things. And my ex-husband actually took me to an audiologist and we had a test, initial test, and I failed it miserably. And did another test and it came back that I was 75% deaf across both ears. And that was a bit of a shock to me because I just thought, I don't know what I thought. I just thought everybody else was probably good. And so they fitted me with hearing aids. So they also said, look, this looks like it's going to be degenerative. So you're probably going to lose more hearing. And so I said, okay. So at that point, I dove into deaf culture and what deaf culture meant to me. And learned sign language, Auslan. I got heavily involved in deaf community events and things like that, and was really interested in this culture that I should have been part of for a lot longer than I was, and it was just I was a latecomer. One of the topics that gets talked about a lot is the old cochlea, and it's quite taboo in the deaf community because as deaf people, we don't believe our hearing needs to be fixed. We're just born differently. We are different. We see the world more visually. We don't necessarily need our ears to do things. And it's just a different way of communicating and a different way of living. And so for a number of years, that was ingrained in me. And even though I knew that my hearing would disappear eventually, cochlea was never an option for me at all until probably about 18 months ago. And basically I woke up one morning and I had 0 hearing, and that was quite frightening. So the tiny bit of hearing that I had all gone, and that was it was a wake up call. We went into the audiologist to test, and it was actually an infection. But as the infection cleared up, they did my hearing test again, and my left ear had dropped even further. I only had 15% hearing left in my right ear. And the audiologist and then subsequently the surgeon said to me, you have no useful hearing left. And that is a smack around the face, especially as I just made managing director. So I was looking at contracts, was having conversations that could get me in a lot of trouble if I misunderstood. So the audiologist and surgeon recommended going down the cochlear path. And it was really hard for me to get my head around because I didn't want to undo all that work that I had done within the community because I needed extra hearing. I felt like I was a complete failure at that point, if I'm honest. And I thought that I'd let the deaf community down. I thought I'd let myself down and, my identity would change. But sitting there and looking at my daughter, going, I'm never going to hear her, what do I do in this situation? And I didn't think at the time, and I still don't think, by the way, that a technology firm is really ready for a fully deaf leader yet. They're on their way, they're getting there, but they weren't really ready. So I needed to sort of try and find a way that would help me keep earning money, keep going in my career, getting to hear my daughter's voice, all those sorts of things. So I opted for the cochlear. And I know that's a really long way of sort of getting to that point, but I think you need to understand all those steps as to why it was such a hard decision for me to make.
Which is also, like something that you wouldn't understand if you're not part of the deaf community, right? Like people would just think, oh, there's a solution there, use it. But yeah, like you said, you didn't want to be seen as like going against the community and an outsider. And I completely get that. So with regards to the sharing the journey online, was it kind of a way of explaining your decisions?
Wow, I had never thought of it that way, actually. Maybe it was. For me, initially, it was just because it was cathartic. I was going through a lot. When I first wrote about it, I was actually feeling really isolated. I just had the cochlear surgery. I had a big hole in my head. My head was shaved. I had to turn up to Salesforce events like that, by the way. I'm sure there's photos somewhere. It was a lot. And everybody kept asking me all these questions. And I was like, you know what? Maybe I do need to process this differently. So for me, it was self-therapy. Mm-hmm. I didn't actually expect anyone to read it, if I'm honest. So for me, it was just get it out of my head, help me to stop feeling so isolated. Because for the listeners, when you go through cochlear surgery, they put the implant in and then they don't turn the cochlear on for 3 to 4 weeks. So that full 3 to 4 weeks, you can't wear hearing aids, you can't do any of that sort of stuff. Nothing works. So I really lost a whole lot during that period of time. And when they turn it on, you might see like babies and kids go, whoa, type thing. It's actually shock more than anything. Really? It's actually not pleasure. Because for me, it was horrid. I hated it being turned on because basically everybody sounded like a robotic chipmunk. I couldn't understand words. I couldn't understand what was going on. And it was overwhelming. It was overstimulation of sound. And so I needed to get that out of my head and sort of explain what that looked like to me because I had no other way of doing it. I didn't really think of it as explaining it to the community. If I had, I probably would have worded it differently. But, it's interesting. A lot of the people from the community have reached out and they get it. But I still heavily use sign language and I'm still heavily part of the deaf community here in Singapore. I'm part of the Singapore Association for Deaf. And I work with deaf individuals day in and day out. So I feel like I haven't lost anything getting cochlear. I do feel like I have gained a little bit, which is good, but it's still a work in process.
Amazing. And that leads me on nicely to the next question, because you mentioned you work with deaf people daily and people that I guess have joined predominantly since you've started an initiative, which is incredible. I won't talk too much about it because I want you to give its... give the real background, because I think only you can kind of give the insight into where the idea came from and how you went about that. So it's called Deaf for Devs. I've heard some of the amazing stories, but I'd love to hear more about that program and some of the outcomes you've achieved in the period of time you've been running it.
Yeah, you know what? I think about the day that I get to retire and what I'd be proud of, and up to date, it'll be Deaf for Devs. It is a program that, I was in the shower. I had this idea. We had problems. We had a shortage of skills. We were getting the same people over and over again, and it was like a cookie cutter issue. And the quality wasn't great and all that sort of stuff. And I'm like, we've got to think about this differently. And I was thinking about the deaf community, and like I said earlier, the deaf community operates differently. They're highly visual. They're highly focused. They make fantastic drivers, for example. I started to think, well, if they're highly visual and they make excellent drivers because they're so focused, isn't that what a developer is? So I reached out to one of the other MDs who was a co-sponsor on the IKEA, who's also deaf, or he's hard of hearing. And I said, look, this is what I want to do. I want to focus a program on deaf and hard of hearing people. Bring them in, don't care where they come from, bring them in. Let's train them to be Salesforce developers and then put them on projects. And he's like, that's insane, but also incredible. Do you reckon we can get it off the ground? It took us 18 months to get it off the ground. but we got sponsorship from everyone across Accenture. And basically the program is they come in, 4 weeks they do theory, 4 weeks they do practical, so they build a showcase, and they present. There's two case studies and 2 showcases during that second 4-week period, and they present however they feel comfortable with, right? So we have people here who are deaf and nonverbal. So how do they present? I don't give them the answers because I explain to them, look, you're going to be on client work, project work, and you're going to have to interact with clients. I need you to work out for yourself what makes you comfortable. You have to self-advocate every single time. So what are you going to do to showcase? And one of our members, Jawei, who's actually leading a development team on Singapore Institute of Technology now, he came in and he did voice AI as his showcase. So he's profoundly deaf, he uses sign language, completely nonverbal. It just blew me away because not only had he done an incredible job building out a commerce store that was integrated into Interaction Studio back then, but then to create voice AI to be able to do the showcase was just, incredible. So that's just one of the stories that we're starting to see from these really imaginative cohort of people. And what's really cool is that a lot of our developers, they either go to the developer pool or they go to the BA pool. So we've got one BA who is leading the mobile workstream on our largest, most complex telco engagement that we've got. He's deaf. He is verbal, but he's deaf. And then some of our others who have gone into the developer pool are working really hard to run teams across the Philippines and delivery centers, and they're all nonverbal. So it's been incredible to watch them progress through this career. And this is one of the cohorts I hope I end up working for, if I'm really honest.
There's no surprise that this will be one of your biggest achievements when you look back. It's incredible. And what have you learned then about the broader culture of your business unit to play a role in this, to, help, to get involved, to be fully submersed in helping these people build their careers?
Do you know what was incredible about the whole program is that it wasn't actually the program itself. It was the change management that went into the program for everyone outside the program. So we ended up doing deaf culture training for everyone here at Accenture. We did sign language classes for 450 people across Accenture, and we did how you collaborate with deaf people on the team. So we would do lunch and learns around what that looks like and how you go about it and how you do a daily stand-up with a deaf person. It's all these sorts of things that you need to consider. And so seeing where we were versus where we are today is incredible. We've got a gala dinner coming up next week, and we have sign language interpreters. We have interpreters at town halls. We are constantly thinking about accessibility from the lens of this group of people. And that's been amazing to see. But I want to tell you one story. So we had Christmas dinner last year, the Salesforce Business Group, and we did it with SADEF, Singapore Association for the Deaf. And what it was they came in, they taught sign language to the group, and then we ordered our dinner in sign language. Now that in itself is pretty cool. But let me paint a picture. So we're in the restaurant. We've all ordered our food. I'm sitting on the deaf table, and one of the members, actually it was Jawei, turned around to female Jatem, who was sitting probably 20 meters away on another table, and Jet signed to him that something was broken and to pull out his laptop. And so he pulled out his laptop, he fixed what was broken, he put it away, and not one word was spoken between them. That in itself just blew my mind, because I'm like, that's leaning in on both parties. And that was it was a beautiful moment, to be honest.
You mentioned something when we first spoke about meeting halfway, and it reminds me when you say leaning in, because when you explained what you meant by meeting halfway, which obviously people understand meeting halfway, but the importance of it, I think I'd made a comment about your colleague who used AI, language AI, speaking AI, and I said, oh, it's incredible now that there's this technology that's going to help people be able to do that. And you said, yes, but it's important that we lean in, that we meet halfway. It's not just expecting the technology and the individual to solve the problem. What do you mean by that, and why is that so important?
Yeah, sure. And this is a really important part, if I'm honest. Let me give you a snapshot of what it's like to be deaf during a day. Okay, so yes, I've got a cochlea, which I'm interpreting constantly. I've got a hearing aid on this side, which I'm only hearing bits and pieces. I've got closed captions in front of me. I'm reading lips the whole time. So I'm constantly interpreting language, no matter what I'm doing. So by about 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, I go through what's called hearing fatigue. My brain melts, and every deaf person out here goes through this to a certain degree. And it's melting not only because of the communication element of it, but because we have to self-advocate constantly. So if I don't hear you, it's actually on me to try and work out how to communicate, right? Whereas my point was sometimes it'd be really nice for a hearing person to lean in a little bit and say, hey, do you want to just do this typing? That'd be amazing. Or, hey, I learned a little bit of sign language. Let's do a little bit of, let's use sign. Technology is great, but it still doesn't bridge the gap of the human connection. And it's always on the deaf person to lean towards the hearing person. And it really needs to be a middle ground, which is why even though, yes, we've got all the technology in the world and all that sort of stuff, we still have sign language interpreters. It makes things a little bit easier. I still use sign language at home. It makes it easier. You know, we try and get every single person that works with deaf people to understand their culture, to understand the way of communicating, because it helps them lean towards the deaf person, and it stops the deaf person having to carry the entire weight of communication, collaboration, and it shares the load. It's the same as parenting, right? You've got to share the mental load. It's the same thing. Yeah. You need to be able to work towards the person with a disability, whether that's hearing, whether that's sight, whether that's a neurodiverse disability, whatever it is. What is it that's going to make it easier for them? And how do I meet them where they need to be met?
Yeah, I think that's probably the biggest message I would like people to take away as well, because that really hit me when, like, I was thinking, oh, the problem's being solved, right? Like, and it's not. It's helping, but there's so much more that we can do to help as well. And that's what I went away and felt from our first conversation. So yeah, that's probably the message that I'd love people to lean into and think about.
It's interesting because a few years ago, I don't know if you remember this, there was a group of MIT kids that created gloves that if the deaf person used it and used sign language, it would interpret it for the hearing person. And everyone was like, whoa, that's so cool. And innovation-wise, yes, super cool. Tech-wise, super cool. From a human perspective, just learn sign language, mate.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
It's not there.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so true.
Don't make the deaf person also wear gloves. Like, that's just crazy.
Especially in Australia.
Yeah.
Well, and Singapore, the humidity there. Yeah. Yeah. But no, that's really such a good message. And for other leaders, you know, other businesses, other people in positions of power, of ability to influence and make change and do good. Like, how can they look at initiatives, not necessarily only focusing on deaf people, hard of hearing, but broader than that, just anything that because obviously for you, this was the obvious one with your own journey. So yep. Other people can look at it from their lens, or look at it from a lens of someone close to them, or, you know, there's lots of lenses to look through. But how do you go about setting up a program like this, and what can leaders do to influence that change within their organizations?
Great question. So first of all, I want to talk about paternalism. So don't take it on yourself if you don't have lived experience. Bring people in from the community that can help shape it. We do that for a number of reasons. One, they will understand the community and what's needed better than you will as somebody who has never been part of that community. Two, it connects people a lot better and gives you an understanding of how to develop a program like that. And three, it really is about giving the voice to the person with a disability. If you start taking that voice away from them and not giving them the podium to stand on to create things like this, you're perpetuating the situation. You got to remember, people with disabilities are 75% more likely not to have a job. And it's because they can't even get through the first stage gate of an interview. So you need to be able to showcase people that have disabilities in really effective, empowering ways. And if that it means that you want to set up a program, by all means, go do it. Get the right people involved. Be their ally, be their supporter. Don't be the person that squashes their voice. So that's the first thing. Second thing, absolutely do it. We've seen areas of success here. SAP did one for neurodiversity a few years ago. We've obviously done Deaf for Devs. These programs work. And what you've got to remember is a person with disability is 3 times more likely to stay in your organization if they feel supported. So if you're creating these programs specifically for people with disabilities, I promise you it's good for business, it's good for your hip pocket, and it's good for the communities as well. So absolutely go for it and do it. Just do it in the right way. Bring the people in from the community, understand the community needs really, really well, and make that person that has the disability from the community be the spokesperson for it. Don't take that away from them. What I do see is a lot of people, wanting to be, part of these things and, get a bit of a badge of honor around all that sort of stuff. It really robs the people from the community of that ability to create something special. Mm-hmm. And it will be more successful if you bring those people from the community in, because they'll hit the nail on the head in terms of what's needed.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I love that. That's and I think it's it's not a half-hearted thing either, right? It's like, if you're going to do it, fully do it, commit to it, and see it all the way through. Because I think, like you said, it's not a badge of honor thing. It's about changing your business for the better, but also changing lives for the better as well.
Yeah, exactly. And it's interesting when you get on this path, like we didn't have any clue as to whether this would work or not. We just wanted to give it a crack. And the moment that it does start to work, this is the true moment that you go, wow, I'm actually moving the needle of change. And, we've got 12 deaf and hard of hearing people. We're now going to roll this program out to other countries across Accenture. So think about the scale of this for a second. Think about Gallaudet University, the only deaf university in the world, which is based in the US. Imagine if they're a feeder for technology firms. Suddenly, the world opens up and we get people with differentiated thinking, people with differentiated skills, and we're starting to create a much better place in terms of employment opportunities for people with disabilities. That is something pretty special.
100%. Well, thank you so much for sharing that with us. I think it's a message that I'd like to get out there as well, and make other companies aware of what you're doing. That's what brought me to your LinkedIn page initially, your journey and the amazing work that you've been able to see the benefits of with the community. And I hope other people are listening and thinking about how they can also do something similar. If anyone is and they want to pick your brains on your program, even careers in the locations you've mentioned, and where's the best place to find you?
LinkedIn.
Thank you so much.
You're so welcome, and thank you for having me. I've always been a fan of your podcast, so it's kind of cool to be on one.
All the pleasure's all mine. Thank you.